Welcome to the Art of Procurement, the official podcast of the Catalyst Co-community. And our purpose is to enhance the impact of procurement by elevating the discussion one conversation at a time. Here at Art of Procurement, Catalysts come together every single week to share their challenges, ideas, successes, and perspectives on the business of procurement. Hi everybody, and welcome to episode 231 of the Art of Procurement podcast. And I'm your host, Philip Eidson. Today on the show, I'm joined by Mike Morsch. Mike is the Vice President of Global Procurement and Supply Chain at CDK Global. Mike shares more about CDK in our interview, but I wanted to just give you a little bit of context. So CDK Global is a $2 billion plus revenue company. They provide technology and digital marketing solutions to the automotive dealership industry. They were formerly the dealer services division of ADP before being spun off into an independent company back in 2004. And why do I share that? Well, in today's conversation, we talk about the transformation of procurement within a mid-sized company that has been subject to a spin-off like this. And is often the case when there's a spin-off, the new company, in this case CDK Global, has to rebuild a large part of its organization from the ground up. So either the infrastructure that comes over from the parent is not suited for a smaller company, or that spun-off entity actually doesn't have any infrastructure that comes over at all. So I questioned Mike about the three phases of transformation that typically occur in a situation like this. So first, it's steadying the ship post the spin-off. Second is then rebuilding capabilities, and then the more fundamental technical infrastructure of a procurement group. And then third is looking forward to bringing in new technology to then evolve the procurement value proposition. So as you'll hear throughout the interview, Mike has deep IT experience outside of procurement. So I wanted to tap into this to understand how he looks at technology and also about developing a business case for investment in technology. So let's go straight into the interview. I recorded it on site at the SIG Fall Summit back in October 2018. And my first question to Mike, like it often is to my guests, was to ask if he found procurement or if procurement found him.
It kind of found me, right? Mm-hmm. So I spent my entire career within IT until I actually came into my current position. And I had a lot of different responsibilities in IT, coming in as a programmer when I first started and moving up into leadership positions. And there was a lot of self-management of our suppliers in the earlier days of IT, I would say, right? So I got a lot of experience in dealing with negotiations with suppliers, and it led to a point where at Motorola I was able to get into a role where I was part of a supplier management team. We called it IT supplier management, and it kind of started with some of the third-party labor outsourcing activities that we were doing, but kind of led to consolidating into software, hardware, pretty much everything that the IT organization cared about. And I was able to participate in leading and creating that function, and did that for about 5 years at Motorola. So that kind of led me down the path to kind of part way into procurement. And we partnered very well with the procurement organization at the company at the time. So when the opportunity came to look at my current company, it was actually a nice transition to move from the technology side into the procurement and supply chain side, which I have responsibility for now, and take all those experiences I had that kind of led me to be eligible for this type of role, and kind of bring a procurement approach that was, I hate to say more friendly to the constituents, but less procurement police oriented and more oriented on how do we partner with the business to get things done. Yeah,
I was going to ask you actually, so coming into it from an IT background or a non-procurement background even, did that... Do you feel that helped you when you came into procurement because you're coming with perhaps a broader experience than just and I've been in procurement my entire career.
Sure.
So, sometimes when you've been in procurement your entire career, it's harder for you to build a relationship with a stakeholder than if you've been from the outside, or at least had a spot in your career that's on the outside, because you can start to understand the impact that some of our decisions actually have on the stakeholders.
Sure, yeah. And in the various other roles I had at the company, I had a lot of relationship management experience, right? And working directly, even at one point I was on the staff of the Chief Procurement Officer, working with the VPs in supply chain, working with a lot of the leadership on our big IT initiatives, right? So my time spent outside of IT procurement, which was most of my career, was spent doing big ERP implementations and managing IT support and development teams. So we had, and I got a lot of experience in managing those relationships. So that very much helped me as I kind of moved into this role. But I have to say, the technology side became more easily for me just because I had that background. But then I had to learn about all the other commodity areas and, from travel to anything else you can think of. And I would have to say my respect for the overall procurement activity and what it really meant to be efficient at that has grown. And a lot of the people I learned from past experiences in the procurement organizations was really helpful to me as well.
Yeah, you find that it was perhaps different on the procurement side of the table of what the perception was when you were outside of procurement.
Yeah, it's a nice flip to come over to the other side and understand what it means from what I always say, the practitioner standpoint. They're just trying to get a job done. They need software to connect into one of our existing solutions. They need services to help them do it. Maybe they need hardware to run it on. They're thinking about what they're trying to do for the business. In procurement, you just want to be able to enable it there. Obviously, you want to get involved as early as possible, so that's where the relationship management skills really come into play.
Now, I know that you've been with CDK, I think it's 3 or 4 years
4 years now.
Yeah. Executing and delivering on a procurement transformation program. I think I'm okay to say that CDK are about $2 billion revenue organization.
Correct.
I just wonder if you could share a little bit more about what CDK actually is for those listeners who haven't heard that.
Yeah, so CDK, we're a technology company, technology services for the automotive industry, right? So car dealerships are our primary customers and original equipment manufacturers. So we make ERP type systems, CRM systems to help run car dealerships. We provide voice over IP telephony to the dealerships. We do websites and digital advertising. So we try to bring many different solutions to play for what car dealerships are looking for. We have across America over 20,000 dealer rooftops that we support. So we're have a pretty big presence there, and it's a great business, very interesting, the automotive business, and so it's a pretty wide span. So our customers are pretty much in every state, every county, in every state, everywhere where you see a car dealership. Hopefully, they have solutions from CDK.
Yeah. It's interesting as I got to know CDK a little bit more from talking to you, how you don't necessarily think about a dealership as being essentially an outsourced organization. You think of it as being a family-run business, that there's generations of owners, but that they're doing everything themselves. But actually, as you get to know CDK, there's so much behind the scenes that you're actually doing on behalf of those owners, that the dealerships are managing relationships, but a lot of the other stuff in terms of infrastructure is stuff that you support.
Yeah, especially the larger dealer groups. They look for companies like CDK to bring that kind of capability to them. So they're all really smart business people, and they know how to run their operations, and they just look for solutions from partners like us to help them be more efficient and better support their customers.
So if you look back 4 years ago when you came into CDK and kind of where procurement is today, what's the journey that you've been on to really integrate procurement into the organization? Yeah,
the big thing initially was, I started 8 days before we spun off of ADP, the payroll company. And I knew that coming in. I'm not quite sure I knew the inertia that had. And it was done in a very short period of time and done very successfully. But there were lots of contracts, lots of relationships to build up. And then I couldn't just focus on my organization, because we really just had to make sure we executed, and we partnered really well with ADP as we went through that transition to try to make things go as well as they could. But that took about 6 months, and then we started working on, okay, what's our procurement organization going to look like? What's our operating model going to be? And then we also started down a very large business transformation of really looking at our overall costs as a company, looking at how our operations were, looking at how we supported our customers to be more effective, right? And that's really been going on 3+ years. So, in the time frame, we were looking at spinning, starting out these transformation programs, and then in the middle of that, me trying to put an operating model in place that would best support the company. I really like to start talking about with the company back then what this operating model was. So we need to move from contracts management to strategic sourcing, right? We need to get away from one-off deals with vendors to turning to vendor partners and starting to manage those relationships a little bit more, and then really putting more discipline around our procurement operations. So it was a great opportunity to do that, right, because I was able to take some of the existing resources that the company had, start working with them and educate them, and then bring in some people from the outside to kind of fill out the rest of the team. And so we've been on a journey. We're still going through our procurement transformation. I would say it's kind
of never ending, isn't it?
It's
and that's
a journey.
Not to say it's a never ending transformation. It's just an evolution rather than a transformation.
The end is very far down the road because we know that there's just so much opportunity what the procurement organization can bring to the company, and there's so many opportunities for us to find solutions that will help us be more effective, be more everything that we do can be more effective as a company with our new procurement tools.
I want to talk a little bit about the spin-out. So I was involved earlier in my career, in fact very early in my career, in a spin-out where it's actually in the automotive industry too. Day one, you have a huge procurement organization because you're part of a larger company, and day two, you've spun out, and all of a sudden, there's not really any infrastructure. And maybe there's a period of time when you are relying on, and we had agreements with our old parent to do some of the work that we need to do ourselves. But you kind of left with, okay, what do I actually do to keep the lights on, as opposed to how do I think about the organizational structure?
Sure.
And I talk to more and more companies that are going through this same process now, because a lot of companies are spinning out smaller organizations as they focus on their core. I wonder if you can think back to that time when you spun out and kind of day one from spinning out. What were the first 6 months in terms of what would you recommend to anybody who's a listener who's going through that process themselves to think about in terms of where the areas of focus are as you initially spin out before you start building the capability, I guess, over the longer term?
Right. It's a couple things. And one, you have systems of record that you're running on. And we had various systems that were used by the previous company, ADP, and we needed to clone those over, and that was all done in a very short period of time. And then we needed to get all the applicable contracts moved over. We needed to renegotiate some of those things. So there were many steps in that process that, if in hindsight, I would go back and I would really try to be more focused on, is there a way that we can extend some of the services from the previous parent company, try to make those transition services agreements that you can put in place more effective? It depends on the type of spin-out you're doing, and then some of that's above my pay grade, I say, sometimes about how that's taken care of, right? And we did a pretty tight cutoff, and so it would be nice to have a little bit more time to kind of manage that, but the company did a great job as we spun off to kind of get those new systems of record in place, clone over what we had before, so there was a lot of familiarity of what those were, and then use those as our starting point for the future. We've made a lot of changes since then, but you can't make those big changes as you're trying to go through that process. I don't know how we would have done it much more effectively, to tell you the truth. Yeah,
you want to keep as much of a steady state, don't you, for us, not necessarily for forever, but you look at the first 6 months or even the first 12 months, don't try and change everything, so at least you can get some stability.
Yeah, and there was a great focus on don't disrupt the business, make sure customers are supported. And we have many customers, many dealerships that we're dealing with, and that was a great focus of the leadership of the company, and I really respected the approach that they took.
How did you find negotiating with suppliers who were, you previously operating under ADP contracts, now you're operating under an organization which is a lot smaller?
Sure.
Did that impact the commercial terms from a lot of those suppliers that you had, or were you able to kind of port over the contract so that you still got the same benefits as if you were ADP, but that
it was a mix, right? And eventually, we're standalone, and it was very clear that there was no relationship. ADP became a supplier to us, just like many others, and it all worked out really well. But we had some people who understood the agreements, and we brought in some new people. I'll say that there was a lot of heavy lifting that went on to try to optimize those as much as we could. I think the good thing is we had opportunities to relook at things now. So there were things that were in place that were working really well for ADP, but as we moved out, we needed to really look at what is it we need at CDK to be most effective, and we were able to make some changes in those areas. And when you go to the marketplace and you start talking with more and more suppliers, you really do get to a better point. Right. Even if you don't end up making a supplier change, you can build a better relationship. And as we built those relationships, it really worked out well for us as an organization, right? And I can't say that everything was perfect, right? And there weren't some battles as there would be.
Always will be.
But we had a really great base of suppliers that we've been working with, and we've extended the partnership to them, and we're working really well with them now. And a lot of them, I can't think of any that really took advantage of the situation, right? They understood what we were going through. Many of them had themselves recently been through various spin-offs or splitting up companies, right? So they somewhat understood it, and we work really well on that.
Great. As you went through your procurement transformation journey, you talked earlier about your experience within Motorola. So, a larger organization. Within CDK, a couple of $1 billion, mid-size organization. Is the value proposition different for a procurement company, for a procurement organization, in a smaller company than a larger company?
In some ways, I think it can have even a bigger impact, right? Because we're closer to the business. So, Motorola, it was very hard for me to reach out to the most senior executives in the company. I had great access to the technology leadership, but we really needed a lot of other people in some of the decisions that we made to be more effective. Within CDK, we have great access to the management. We can pull in a lot of different, whether it's the CIO or the CTO, the different leadership, and build up those relationships. So I think in some ways, once you do that and you start working more closely with them, you can actually have a bigger impact because you better understand what their goals are. And it's harder to do in a larger company, right? It's $100 billion companies. I have a hard time getting my head around how you actually manage those sometimes, right? Because it's just so many moving parts. And even if you have a tremendous command and control operation, which some companies do, I think it's still hard to really have that vision and visibility of everything that's going on. So I see that procurement can really work with all these different functions a little bit more closely, understand what they're doing, and really have a bigger impact. And I think we've had that. I think we've had a really good success in doing that.
So one of the challenges I often see for organizations of your size is in a larger organization, the stakeholders outside of procurement, in fact, all stakeholders, all people who work in a larger organization are kind of used to having support functions do all the things that aren't their job for them. So if you've got something that isn't your job, there's somebody to give it to, basically. In a smaller company, that's not necessarily the case. People are used to being a lot more autonomous and having a greater span of kind of control and influence. And so often they want to keep things closer to their chest rather than actually go and ask for support. I wonder how you've kind of managed that. If you've seen that, within CDK, but two, how do you kind of manage that so that the stakeholders see you as somebody who can help them rather than somebody to fear?
Yeah, and we did experience that, I'll be honest with you. And a lot of the policy and decisions, that we brought in were really focused around trying to break through that and trying to open people up to say, hey, we do need to have better controls around how we manage. We need that visibility. We can actually help. And so we started getting some wins early on and doing this. The policy that we have for procurement is deliberately one page. It's remained one page for the 3.5 years that we've had it. Trying to make it as simple as possible, right? Keep the premises there, and that focusing on early involvement of our organization. The earlier we can get involved, we have proven history of being able to impact it. Someone comes in on a Friday and says, hey, I want to buy this software and I need this services to start on Monday because we have a big implementation, you can't really help, and you have to be very honest with people and tell them that. And then I think just getting really good management support, which I've been very fortunate, helped us kind of get through those type of things.
You've also got to be very selective in how you help, I think, because you don't have access to the same size teams. You're not able to build the same size team. So you can't go and bring in somebody who's a specialist in every single category, for example, because there's just not the ROI there of having somebody sit there who just does one category all the time.
Sure.
How do you think about where you can make an impact? Is it which categories? Is it over a spend threshold? Is it focusing on certain stakeholders? Is there any kind of process behind saying, yes, this is something that we can support you with, or this is an area of the business we want to proactively go and support, versus those where we just want to say,
sure,
stakeholder, you can do that on your own, and I'm here to help you if you come into any problems.
Yeah, we really did it based on size of spend, impact in the organization. The first thing we had to do was actually get that data together, though. So there was some basic data repositories that existed on payables data. We needed to expand that, ensure that it was all in there. We had to go make all kinds of data cleansing activities to get it to the point where we kind of knew, okay, here's our big spend categories. And then we really went after them. So travel, the technology areas, telecom are some of the bigger ones that we were able to get after, and then go out and build those partnerships with the business. That's what targeted is. And plus just, I came in and, I was able to go through a good onboarding process, and I was introduced to pretty much every senior executive in the company. So that kind of gave me a leg up and starting to build those relationships. And we actually were able to use our business transformation to actually accelerate what we were doing, right? Because we were already going down that path of trying to get some improvements in our cost structures and relationships with the suppliers. But the business transformation gave us a whole new level of visibility, and I was able to participate in that overall transformation team and, help us really understand what the rest of the company was doing, and people knew I was there, and I tried to put on
where to find you.
Yeah, I was in all the meetings, right, and I was there with a smiling face and a hand out ready to help, as opposed to try to control what they were doing. So it was very powerful to have that going on.
What kind of governance structure do you have with the other execs across the business? Is there something that's, I don't want to say structured, where they continue to be involved in at least understanding what procurement's doing and the results you're driving, or is it a little bit more ad hoc? Isn't probably a fair way of saying it, but more that they use you and they come to you when they need you.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a little bit of that goes on. I think what we benefit from having the business transformation is it created a mechanism, a governance structure around that. And then we kind of took that, we're continuing on the transformation, but it's gone through a couple different stages. And learning from that, then we started putting some things in place where we were building up relationships. So we put in a investment council with the technology team that the CIO and I both co-sponsor. And we bring our teams together, every 3 or 4 weeks, and we talk about the investments, what's coming up. It's starting to build out that discipline, and we're starting to look at other areas. But a lot of it is just, I have some really good people working in our group, and they work really hard on reaching out, getting with the business and understanding what the next things that are coming. And we've had enough good things happen where we do have more and more people who are very proactively coming to us because they see the value that we bring.
They've heard from advocates within the business who have worked with you.
They have, right? And, we still have, some people who come in last minute, right? But, we understand their perspective, and we try to guide them back in. That's why the policy isn't 30 pages, because I know they won't look at it if it's that.
Right, and if you start pointing fingers when people do that, it's a really fine balance, isn't it, between one, understanding that they were perhaps under pressure as well to try and do something quickly, versus calling them out for not following a policy. Because the more you call people out, the less likely they are actually to want to come and work with you, because they're going to fear coming to you rather than looking to you as somebody who can help them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So sometimes you have to grit your teeth a little bit, right? But since I understand the predicament that they're usually in, but I think the results show that if they do come to us early in the process, we've been able to not only get better for them, better results and everything, it's actually easier for them, right? Because they're off doing a lot of heavy lifting or doing things, and they don't necessarily need to be doing that because our team members will do it, right? And kind of back to your earlier thing, right? How do you pick and choose where you want to do that? I'm always much happier with my team out having those conversations and helping them do a bigger item than worrying about chasing down the requisition and that kind of thing. And we're moving the organization very much to more of a self-service as they go through this, right, with the automations that we put in place. So it's just easier to kind of engage with the organization now, the procurement team, than it was before. It makes more sense to the business.
Right. Now, I know that you talked about your IT background and technology background. Were you looking at how you can digitize a lot of procurement from the off? And if so, how did you kind of approach that? Where do you actually start in trying to digitize something that, historically, as you said, you did the spin from ADP, you had some technologies that you kept in place for a few months, but you're really starting with a blank slate.
Sure, yeah. So we knew we had our systems of record that we had brought over, a lot of legacy systems and that type of thing. Good technologies when they were implemented, but a lot of them didn't really talk to each other, and there were connectivity issues there, and they just weren't doing what we really needed them to do. So we've gone through many different stages of looking at things, but one of the initial things we targeted was just in our supply chain. We had really no good visibility with our suppliers for them to communicate to us. A lot of manual activities, a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of phone calls to understand when we sent out our signal to them on demand, what was their commitment to meet it, so that we could pass that through and make sure that the installs that were going to be associated to that equipment for the dealerships were going to be met, right? So we put a supply chain visibility system in, and then we started working on optimizing that. And then we started looking at some of our core systems and looking at some managed services to put in place. So like one of the areas that we very much have improved is in our temp labor management. We went to a managed service model with a new technology that's very easy to use and put that in place. And then we kind of came back to the core and really looked at the entirety of the source to settle area, everywhere from that first touch point with our business partners inside the company when they have a request, down through the payables process and on the back end. And we've changed out all those systems now. So this has been a very exciting year for us because we have put some new technology in place. And like any technology project, you have a few bumps along the road there, right? But we're very happy with what we have. And now that gives us that opportunity with the new system of record that has more connectivity, better touch points to the business to really go through that digital transformation. We have gaps that we need to fill in. And that's great, but we've given ourselves new analytics tools, new e-procurement tools, new contracts tools, new supplier management tools, all things that we didn't really have before. We had a basic procure-to-pay system, but we didn't have strategic sourcing tools for the company. And now we're going to be maturing ourselves on that. Now that gives us a great opportunity to step back and look around in the marketplace, and there's just a great set of technologies that are coming out now that are going to help us get smarter about what we do. And I think a lot about the strategic sourcing area just because I know that can be a big impact in the vendor management side. And I'm just really looking at the technologies and talking about what we can do to start bring insights to my category leads. So that instead of the hard work that they do today, which is great working with the business and going out and talking to suppliers and doing all that to try to get off our data, off market data, off publicly available information to help them better understand where they should focus their time based on contract renewals coming up or new desires by the business that they can show up on their desk. Maybe it's utopian a little bit to think about that, but it's happening, right? And it can be simple things that'll help us look at some of the smaller agreements, but it could be some of our large providers too, where there's new competition and we just need to make sure that we can go out and either bring them into the fold or maybe there's better pricing now available that we weren't aware of and we haven't looked at something recently. Everybody's very busy, and the more you can have the automation, the artificial intelligence out there helping to kind of think that through, it'll be good. And then the more integrations we do, it just helps me tie my team together, which is a global team. So we have people in North America, Europe, India, all trying to work hard together to be successful for the organization. All these technologies will let them focus on what they do best and not just do the manual activity. So the automation helps. And then getting to the insights is really going to be helpful to us.
I got a couple of questions around that, but I want to just go back a moment to talk about when you were talking about putting in what I think is some of the foundational technology. You talked about looking at the P2P process, for example, but there's a lot of technology that you've implemented over the last 4 years of the transformation. How do you build, or are there some tips on how to build the business case to actually be able to invest in that technology?
Sure. And a lot of it is, we had to build up partnerships, right? So when we looked at the source to settle space, there was a controls element to that, right? And so we worked with the finance organization as we looked at things and said, hey, we have a common goal here, right? Our controls are not what we necessarily need them to be. We have a lot of manual processes and not much is automated. Let's put a business case together that we can take some of the investments that are available inside the company and show that actually we're going to improve the controls, that we're going to eliminate a lot of manual things and free up people's time, and actually be able to go out and get better visibility to drive the cost savings. So we put a joint business case together to get after that, right? And it was a good time at the company with the business transformation going on to get that.
It's kind of a platform to build
into. And so it helped us in that we were being successful in providing some of the margin improvements for the company that they were looking for. But it also helped us because everybody was getting very sharp on those business cases. And, we were able to look at all the manual things that went on and quantify some cost associated to that. And we made some commitments, right, that, where we could get additional savings would come, right? And so that's how we got after the business case on that. Some of the others were just, like the supply chain visibility. That was more of a quality play. We did get cost savings out of it, right? We took, it wasn't the biggest cost savings that we did, but we gave so much better visibility to our business partners that they were able to make much better commitments to our customers, and that was huge for us.
Now, as you look across the source to settle and you're thinking about a technology roadmap, did you look at a suite, or were you looking at point solutions?
We kind of did a little bit of both, including looking at various sourcing models that are available out there, and we really ended up going, okay, we have a great opportunity to put in lots of capability. And more or less what we were able to do is we took the cost structure that we had previously that was more or less focused on procure to pay without like electronic invoicing on the back end, without really good connectivity to our suppliers, and really kind of a supplier environment where they didn't really love the solution we had in place, to an environment where we kept that same ability, got the electronic invoicing in place, got the supplier network that's tapped into it, and then got all the strategic sourcing tools that come with it, right? And so that was all coming in one bundle, and we were able to get that negotiated as procurement, right? So we helped ourselves out here a little bit, and was able to get a really, very fair deal in place to help us get that done. So we really went the suite route. So I think having really good systems of record at your base that are kind of core suites is helpful, and then you start looking at some of the other technologies that you can bring in. Everything we implemented obviously wasn't from the same supplier, but the bulk of what we have in the source to settle space is a single supplier who's bringing that capabilities together for us.
As you implemented, are there any specific lessons learned that jump out at you, or things that were particularly important to engagement and getting the business users engaged in using those technologies?
Yeah, I think we did a pretty good job of having a PR campaign around this and really talking about the changes, because we really changed the dynamic and the way people were interacting with procurement as we went through this process. And a lot of things that procurement used to do for people, because it was just too hard in the old environment of chasing down the approvals, finding out where the funding was going to come from, because it was just easier for us to contact finance. We've moved that back to the requesters. The requesters best understand what their business needs are. They're working with their leadership to justify these programs, right? And we're just helping execute that. So I hate to say we moved the work, but we moved the work to the right place for the people who understood what needed to be done.
You're no longer a bottleneck.
And so we're less of a bottleneck, right? I'm not sure I've completely taken us out of that, right? But we're less of a bottleneck when it comes to it, right? And people are starting to understand that. But we had to do a lot of communication, so it really went back almost a year before the implementation started, was to start bringing people up to speed. Hey, this is coming. This is going to change a little bit. These are what the tools are going to be. This is what they're called. This is where you'll find them. This will be a little bit more self-serve than what you had before. We really had to put a focus around that communication.
Did you see that by doing that and giving some control back to the requesters and the stakeholders in the business on the simple transactions actually changed their perception of working with procurement, because they're no longer looking at procurement as much of a bottleneck and a bureaucracy, if you will. They're starting to see you as being more of a strategic, trusted advisor function, because you're not getting involved in the weeds of things that previously they may just be like, what's procurement doing? They're getting involved in all these things. I don't even need their help.
Yeah, and we took the opportunity to simplify, right? So streamline approval processes, work well with our finance partners to figure out what makes sense based on the dollar level and responsibility in the organization, make it as simple as we could, yet keep that visibility, right? So we could never abdicate that responsibility of ensuring that the CFO or the VPs in finance or the business presidents couldn't quickly understand what their activities were and have an impact on that, right?
I know that you talked a little bit about you starting to use AI and other technologies in bringing insights to your buyers and to help making them more informed. And I know that you're always looking out in the market for new technologies. I know that just from our interactions, before today and in social media and everything, that you're always really interested in seeing what's out there and what technologies we can take advantage of. I think probably because you just natural curiosity of technology.
Sure.
How do you think about separating what's actually usable from a technology perspective versus a lot of the hype that you see in terms of some of these new technologies that may not necessarily be ready for prime time yet?
Sure. I will admit I'm in the discovery stage here, right? And I think the marketplace is probably more in the discovery stage than people will admit.
Yeah.
So if you watch the news or you watch a lot of the things online, you might believe some of these things are more real than they are. But there's a lot of reality to this too, right? And so, we're sitting here today at the SIG event, and there's some really good technologies that are going on here. There's different partners that are new, upcoming in the marketplace. Some of the large players are coming out with these things, right? So there's enough reality to it that it's something that I'm working on now to look into, right? And then put together a business case to justify these things. And I think those insights that I talked about, that can become real, and I think it can become real sooner than later. But it is going to take a little focus, in it maybe is a little bit of a different technology project than the big ERP things that we've done in the past, that I've been involved in the past, because it's maybe more targeted and probably a little bit more experimental. I think as a practitioner, you need to come into it knowing that the suppliers are figuring their way through this. And if you can work with them, you might actually get to a further point. But I'm not sure there's a plug-and-play solution out there today that's going to magically do some of the things that I talked about earlier.
I think that's really important. And it's actually a follow-up question I was going to have is, obviously as procurement, more than I would say other areas of the business, we don't want to waste money. And so we're probably more careful in the decision-making process that goes into buying, especially new products, new services, new delivery models, a new technology. How do you kind of approach the fact that you may need to experiment with a few technologies and you may need to experiment and it not work? How do you balance that with the investment that you got to make on piloting some of these things?
Right. Well, I'd like to think we're going to be trading, cost for our time, right? So that's why I'm very willing to partner with some of these companies early on in their development, believing that, okay, as I'm learning, I pay a little bit less. They can work with me on their side.
Being an early adopter.
We all benefit on that, right? I think that's where it's going to go for a company my size, where we have many different investments that we want to make as a company, and it may not be that procurement is going to get this kind of funding to go after and do that, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't be out there really looking and starting to work with a few companies that can help provide that.
What do you think our role is in helping the rest of the organization in digital transformation?
Well, I think we can set a good example, and show that it's going on. Our company is pretty progressive when it comes to that and is looking very closely at the digital transformation and adoption of robotic process automation. So that's one of the areas that I'm partnering with a lot of the rest of the business in working on that program, and that's hitting many of our different functions right now. We've had a program in place for about 18 months and starting to mature that. And that's not just a procurement thing. And in fact, it really is outside of procurement, supply chain. I've been fortunate enough to be involved and help sponsor the program and work with the leaders on that. So that's kind of where it's maybe a bit unusual in my role as the leader of procurement and supply chain to get involved in that. But I'm trying to, eat my own dog food on that. And so I'm looking at where those technologies, the robotic process automation, can come into play and start working in procurement and supply chain too.
I'm sure there's only so much you can share, that's, I don't want you to share anything that's proprietary, but I just want to understand a little bit more about the RPA that you talked about, just so that people can kind of visualize what the opportunity today is in using RPA technologies. So I wonder if there's anything you can share around use cases that you've seen for using RPA in the business.
And it's hard to touch on some of the use cases just because, I don't want to divulge too much there. But, any area where you have a lot of repetitive activities, kind of swivel chair, things moving data from one system or another, spreadsheets to another. There's just plenty of opportunity there. Even, we feel like we're not the largest company in the world, and so probably a $100 billion company with a lot of redundancy and a lot of that manual effort can really gain from it. But we're seeing multiple areas, and from our touch points within our finance organization or other areas where there is benefit that can be achieved with these tools. It's real. We're taking man years out of the effort here, and it's really work that it's a distraction. That's where our focus is. Work that's a distraction, doesn't add value overall, except that you need information put in, you need certain jobs done, and those things help then free up those people who really know our business to more focus on the customer or focus on the function and be more effective there. When I look at supply chain, I think there's certain areas where there's just manual things that our buyers are doing, or others that it's drudge work that they're not looking forward to.
Right.
And we have some really good, smart people, and I'd rather have them thinking more about how they can work with the supplier, how they're expediting shipments and that type of thing, and not just focused on some of the clickety-click that they have to do.
Yeah, they don't come to work to do those kind of things.
Right. So I think, RPA is pretty real. I think you can find a lot of successes out there in the marketplace and some pretty good tools. It's probably the most real of all the technologies that are kind of in this space of artificial intelligence and machine learning. It's all on that continuum. It's something that I think you have to kind of get down that road, right? You got to streamline processes, automate what remains, and then start focusing on where the insights and the artificial intelligence can really build on top of that.
Yeah, and there's some really simple solutions. I mean, I know this is very simplistic and probably not relevant to most folks, but my business, we use tools like Zapier, I got to say that right, or Zapier, where it's essentially saying if this, do that. So if there's an element that comes from one technology that does something and says something, then it connects it with another technology, and it kind of creates all these APIs where they don't exist, so that you can suddenly take a whole process of doing an activity that used to be have a lot of manual intervention, and it just runs automatically. You don't see any of it, you just see the outcome. And so then you can start using that outcome. You would never have done it yourself because it just is so time consuming. In the case of a larger organization, you do, but it costs you a lot of money to do that.
Sure.
Now you only need to worry about the output, and then what you can spend your time focusing on what the data's telling you versus actually trying to get the data.
Sure, absolutely.
We've talked a lot about IT. We've talked a lot about technology. In your perspective, is technology and being a technology leader fundamental to being a successful procurement leader as we start looking into the future?
I think so. I think most functional leads should start thinking about things a little bit differently. Maybe I'm a little biased because I have a technology background. Yeah. But, I kind of some things I've been saying to my group and in various other settings that I've done speaking engagements on or talked about is, I think procurement and supply chain leaders are technology leaders now. They need to be partnering with their technology internal teams, the CIO specifically, to talk about what those technologies would be. I think, the technologies today make it really easy with the hosted solutions and cloud-based activities for functions to go rogue a little bit, right? And I'm not suggesting that because I actually believe firmly that, the IT teams and internal teams need to be a great part of what we're doing. So like when we talk about robotic process automation, IT's right in there with the process team working on those things, right? And the things that I'm looking at and working with the technology teams, I wouldn't even think of talking about a lot of these things without bringing them in. So our big implementations that we've done, it was a partnership, bringing in the IT, helping them get it prioritized in their queue, by the way, right? That's how the business cases that we put together were helpful.
Struggled with is like, you need to make sure you have the IT resources to help you with an integration, unless there's something that you don't need any integration. Right. Because without that, it's going to be really difficult to execute.
Right. And again, that's just, your company has to be pretty good about their portfolio management, right? And as business cases come up, that everybody gets kind of a fair view of those so that you can help your IT teams understand that they're not going to be coming at coming at them from 5 different directions.
Yeah.
There was a lot of good governance activities that took place within our company to help the IT team not be inundated with so many different stray requests. And I was like everybody else, and I had to work through that that process. But just like I was putting a process in place to better manage the inputs coming into my organization, the technology teams have done a very similar thing. Like that.
And it's interesting how we talk a lot about the impact of digitization and transformation on procurement and what it means to us. We don't often stop and think about the impact it has on our stakeholder groups as well. And IT specifically, we've gone from a function really helping to manage and sustain your own applications to one that is really about integrating a lot of different SaaS products or solutions in a way that actually all coordinates and connects. So the role of IT itself is evolving as well as the role of procurement and some of the other business functions.
Right. And one of the other reasons I think a procurement leader needs to be a technology leader. In my position now, I wouldn't want to abdicate that to somebody else anymore, right? Because it's my process, my function. Myself and my leads have a pretty good vision about what they want to accomplish, and we know that the technology can help us. And so I want to stay on top of that. I want to be involved in that as probably even a little bit more than a sponsor of the programs, right? Roll up the sleeves and really get in there and understand, and then look at the marketplace and try to do what we're doing, which is kind of knock through the fact from the reality of some of these new technologies. And then come in with a business case that suggests how we apply those in here. And I don't know how you do that as a VP of procurement like myself, or a leader of a senior leader of anything without.
If you're a technophobe.
You just can't. It's maybe 30 years ago or 40 years ago that worked, right? And you counted on your IT organization to be the bastion of knowledge for that, right? Now, you have to have that technology savvy. I think you got to know the business, number one. And then if you got enough technology savvy, you can really come in and help guide these things.
I know it's about time to wrap up, so I just have one final question. It's actually on this kind of same point that you were just making there. And that is, how do you encourage your team to kind of go out and learn a little bit more about all the different technologies and become technology leaders in of themselves, so that they can show a curiosity about what's out there, or to learn a little bit more about what's out there?
Right. I think you got to hire the right mindset into those roles, right? And so I do have a tendency to bring in former IT people into some of these roles, or procurement people who have a passion for it, right? I think that was what really helps, right? So I don't think you should be a category lead for hardware, software, some of these things, unless you actually have a very much of an interest in how these technologies are going to be used in the company. So I look for people who kind of have those skill sets and look forward to that RFP associated to a piece of equipment, and they're excited about working with the business and not just they want to take the lead, right? They want to be in there. They want to make the decision almost, right? That's the way I look at it, right? On some of these technologies, you got to have a little bit of that passion. Sometimes passion can get too far, but
it drives a curiosity, doesn't it?
And a lot of it's very much tied into how our business runs, right? So if they take a step back and really think about it, they get to learn so much about what our business is all about, how it supports the customers, and I think that makes you as a procurement person, anytime you feel like you're having an impact that's going to benefit the customer. Sometimes we feel a little isolated in procurement, right? You're further back, and I spent years in IT too, right? So sometimes you felt like you were further away from the customer. So I think those type of people really make the difference, and that's what I look for.
And you look for that in what I would call non-tech, or let me ask it a different way. Is there such a thing in procurement from a category perspective or even a sourcing perspective as a non-technology role?
It's getting harder and harder these days.
Yeah, I mean, it's permeating everything that we buy. So are we looking for the same interest and curiosity even in categories that historically haven't really had that much of a technology
if you look at it, I mean, temp labor now, complete technology play in how you manage your human capital. Travel, complete technology play now in how you manage all that data, all that information, all your travelers and custody of care, and making sure that you're really taking care of people. It's not just about doing a deal with one of the airlines, right? It's about having a program in place and a tool out there that connects to people, goes to their phone, makes
Gives you
that
the data
experience,
that you
gives
need.
you data, right? It's and in the end, you make a great point here. All these things are spurning off or putting out data. You want to be able to look at that data, bring that data into your own analytics tool, and then use that for your next set of insights, whether you do it manually or you get one of these tools to do it, right? So I do have a hard time understanding any area really where you really wouldn't want to apply the technology, even to the point of if it's such a simple thing, it's in the catalog, it's in a punch out, it's being managed by somebody else, but you got to do it through the technology, right? So you can't get away from it anymore.
Well, Mike, I want to thank you so much for joining me. The very last question, hopefully, is the easiest one. And that's if anybody would like to reach out, connect with you, where would be the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, the best place is probably in LinkedIn. So my information is out there. My contact information is there. And I try to be pretty responsive if someone sends me a message in there. I'm also in Twitter. And if you want to come, follow me there or look at some of the things that are going on, those are two good places. I would appreciate it. So thank you.
All right, no problem. What I'll do is I'll include links to both your LinkedIn and your Twitter profiles in our show notes today. So just go to autoprocurement.com, search for Mike Morsch, and search for CDK. They'll come up there. So,
all right.
Mike, thank you so much.
All right. Have a great day.
Thanks. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.